Welcome to the Possibility Hub video series. I'm Carol Talbot, the creator and founder of the Possibility Hub, an advocate for awakening, encouragement, and creating opportunities for an expansion of awareness and consciousness. In this episode, with sacred site whisperer John Paul Eagleheart Fischbach, we're traveling to different parts of Europe to learn about beautiful ceremonies and practices to ease and celebrate the time of transition. Trust me, this is a very joyful, rich, and wonderful conversation. Enjoy. Hello again, John Paul. Welcome back to the Possibility Hub. And some people may think this is a doom and gloom subject, death rites, except it's very enlightening. And I know as a sacred site whisperer, where are you taking us in the world today? You've got a little tour we're going on today.
We're going on a little tour. So we're going to hit some places in Ireland. We're going to come to a place in southern Victoria in Australia. We're going to go to Germany and Portugal, and then back to Germany. So I think the idea when you and I chatted about, what's something to share, it's this idea that the most important transitions in your life are coming in and going out.
Yes.
And I think we do an extraordinary job in our present culture about coming in, depending on your culture, but that gets honored. But not very many cultures do a good job with the going out.
It's ignored, isn't it? Nobody wants to talk about that transition time. And what an auspicious day to be speaking about this, because 2 years ago, on this day, my mother made her transition.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's quite auspicious that we're talking about this. And I've actually sent her a note to a few people and said, remembering and celebrating my mother. So, rather than many cultures go into that sort of mourning process, but then think about mourning and the double play on the meaning of word morning, a fresh day, a fresh start. So, again, I just remember when I remember my mother, I remember the wonderful celebration of life we had for her. There was so much joy, so much laughter in the world. How beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things, as I've been, site whispering for 30 years, traveling all over the world, when you come across an archaeological site, they just get written off as a tomb. Everything's a tomb, right? Done, it's a tomb. And then they dig a little deeper and they're like, well, yes, but we haven't actually found any bones. Like, well, so I often think that you could say the same about a modern church. If the last thing that happened in that church was a funeral, then this is a tomb. But we do lots of things in the church. Saying goodbye to our loved ones is one of the things that we do. So I think that's a really good example of these sites. And when we start talking about helping your ancestors, your loved ones transition, there's two parts to that. What are the things that we do for ourselves to separate ourselves from that person? And what do we do for that spirit to help them separate from this life? So the picture behind me is at Loch Grew in Ireland. And this is your typical passage mound. It's a dolmen. There's, an opening. And when I crawled in there, what I got to see was the experience that bodies are put in there to wait until the summer solstice sun comes shining through, because it's aligned to the summer solstice sunrise, to wake them up. And then there are shamans that invite them to come back to the community for the celebration down by the lake. And I think there are things that we used to do for our ancestor spirits as we cared for them that we don't do anymore. And that I keep finding cultures that did this, like these cultures in Ireland. The other thing that happened in Ireland, you remember that we were in Loch Gur and looking at understanding the rituals of time. So in this stone circle, it was the rituals of the seasons of the year, but it was also the rituals of life. And that they were teaching you that there's a cycle. to life. So I think one of the things that I think is sad is that we view life as a linear,
Yes.
that, and that, what if it is cyclical? What if there's a journey, you come here, you do some work, then you go, and then you come back and you go. And, cultures, and we call that reincarnation, but it's a cycle, yeah?
And it changes your perception of past, present, and future, because if you're looking at, a wheel or a circle, and you think of it as the hands of a clock, is, to the future or the very distant past. So it actually takes away the notion of time, which is something that we've created to make sense of these cycles.
Yep. And one of the things that I loved about the teaching at this stone circle was this idea of the cycle of life. So that when someone passes away, passes out of this existence, there's always an understanding that they're still around. They're still doing things. They're still having another adventure. They're having another, there's a spirit journey. It's not over. And I love that about it. So then we go up to this place. So I love this. This is Loch Crew. So when I first got to Loch Crew and I crawled into this passage mound, you can see the little entrance
Yes.
there. So I crawled in and there was a spirit inside waiting, doing her thing. But anyway, I said, so what's with the mounds? This particular part of Ireland, in the Boyne Valley, is just full of mounds. And I said, so, they're saying these are all tombs, but this is a lot of construction just for that. And she laughed at me and she said, well, it's one of the things that happens here, because the most sacred thing you could do is to crawl back into the womb of the mother. And you can't crawl back into your human mother. So these were built as little pregnant bellies all over the landscape, so that at various points in your life, you could crawl back into the womb of the earth.
Oh,
And
how
so, yes, yeah, sure, death happened here and bodies were laid to rest here, and that was fine. But that's only one of the things that happened here. But I love that concept, that it's
yes.
helping going back to the womb. Again, the cycle.
And was it only used as people made their transition, or when you think about certain passages in life, when that there's times in your life when you kind of go, I need my mum.
Yep. All
And you
passages.
could go to one of these mounds and, again, we go back to as above, so below. So, the physical form is also reflected in the outer world, in the cosmos, and in so many different ways. So, going to maybe this place when you're feeling that you're going through a transition in your life, and feeling that, you've got the connection with your mother and the safety of back in the womb.
Yeah.
Being
So
nourished.
I said when I got in there, there was a spirit already there, because she was hosting a transition for two young people who were doing their coming of age ceremony.
Oh,
And
okay,
they're,
so I'm spot on
yeah,
there.
absolutely. So it was just so incredible that, yes, you find, archaeologists find bones and ashes here because that was the last thing that happened before it got closed up. That's all. It isn't that's
Well,
the only
are
thing
they
that
all
happened.
closed up now?
Mm. Yeah. It looks like historically there was a period where they just went into, there was no use for them. And then there was a bit of reuse and then nothing. So most of the places, most of these mounds in Ireland were completely buried over and filled in and hadn't been, nothing had happened in there for thousands of years.
So,
So
John Paul, do you feel
that's
that
another
some of
story.
your work is to reawaken people to the sacred ceremonies, a sacred path of honoring when, you know, especially that transition time, the death rites are a little bit, as I said, they're not very sacred in a lot of ways these days. And, going back to the earth. So in some ways, that's, to reignite our memory of what these places and spaces were for. It's really very
How they
special.
how they were used, and
and to
then make us
reignite that
reflect on how do
memory.
we. Yeah, exactly.
Just as I said, oh, it could be used for other transitions in our life, a transition. And then you said, well, actually, when I was there, so in some ways, the reason I must have said that was it sparked a memory, it sparked something. And hopefully, this conversation will create that spark and memory for many people of, oh, especially if anybody's viewing from Ireland or some of the other places that we're visiting today or going there on a trip, to go there for a different purpose as a rite of passage, a rite of transition.
Yep. But that's, I mean, that's the hope of the documentary series, that people will get that spark of remembrance and think, wow, yes, I do feel something when I'm at this site. There is a point of remembering. I am remembering these transition moments of my life. Very cool.
Beautiful.
Okay, so staying in Ireland, we're going to go over here. So this is a place called Ceremonies. And Ceremonies is, in my experience of being there, like a giant cemetery, but an ancient one. So when I got there, there's these mounds. So this is the largest mound you see in this picture, but there's lots of mounds, lots and lots and lots of them. So when I got there, it was quite busy spirit-wise. There were lots of people, and that's, they were off doing something. So I was accessing a time when there was a bunch of people. So as I was just sort of watching there, a young couple passed by, and they were having a bit of an argument because they had to go visit her clan's mound, but then they also had to go visit his clan's mound, and they were deciding which to do first. So I was kind of listening to them and thinking, oh, okay. And then a kind of older, sort of wise woman came up and saw me and said, welcome. I noticed that you're not actually, you're not dead. And I said, no, no. She said, so where are you from? And I said, well, I'm, from your future. And she said, oh, well, that's nice. Why have you come? And so I said, well, I just am curious about this place and what it was used for. And she said, well, it's quite busy because we're in between the summer solstice and Lunasa, and we're on the occasion of a full moon. And so the full moon between summer solstice and Lunasa is quite a popular time because everyone comes to bring and make offerings before we go into the autumn and the winter when no one's going to come here. So this is the time they come to visit the ancestors. And I said, well, what is that visit like? And she said, well, they bring offerings, but mostly it's to share stories. And I loved that. That
I
the
love
reason
that
they
as
were going
well.
to these places was to share stories and to remember. Now she said, look, there at the times of Beltane and Samhain, there are specially trained shaman that are here. So at Beltane is when everyone's bringing their bones or their cremated remains to inter them, and there's a shaman that helps. So that's about delivering your message and your prayers up to the spirit. And then Samhain is when the shamans are there to listen to the messages that are coming from the spirits, and they're making note about, right, we need to get to that family and remind them of, or they've, requests from spirit. So I thought that was interesting, that, we look at graveyards as, oh, scary, don't go there, sad. But how interesting that in this culture, twice a year, you went to send your prayers up and to receive the prayers coming down. I think that would be
That
beautiful.
it's a two-way communication. And what you just shared with me about sharing stories, again, reminds me of the beautiful celebration of life we held for my mother. And I opened up to everyone if they wanted to share any stories or memories about my mother. And actually, it was so beautiful, John Paul, because I heard hilarious stories about my mother that I didn't know, and it made
Yeah.
everyone laugh. And you're right, even going to a cemetery shouldn't be a sad thing. It should be a time when you sit and reflect on the beautiful times in physical form that you've shared with that person, and maybe get some insights in different ways as well.
Yeah.
So there are rituals that we can do to keep that alive, as I will be doing today.
Well, one of the ceremonies at this place was there was like a caretaker family, like there would be at any cemetery. And the caretaker and his family were supplying people with offerings if they didn't have things. So if you didn't have whatever flowers or something, they had them for you. And one of the things was they had quartz, white quartz for you. So this mound that you're seeing behind me has a whole part that's just all white quartz. It's quite extraordinary, the amount of white quartz. And that's a common feature here, is that these mounds are filled with white quartz. So she said the spirit that was guiding me around said, "Oh, well, come here." So we walked over to see this family, and the mother and father were giving a piece of white quartz to the children. So a small piece, yeah, of white quartz, and then some clay. And they put the white quartz in the middle of the clay, and then they rolled it in their hands to make a ball. And they rolled it and made a ball while they told stories of the deceased person. So they were putting the memory and all the thoughts and the conversation into the quartz through the clay into these balls, and then the balls were placed in the mounds.
Which goes back to the notion that crystals hold memory and are, we talk about RAM and memory on computers and the crystals that hold the memory, but in your computer. But again, in the outer world, it's crystals. When you hold a crystal, you should be able to gain some of the wisdom and memory that's placed in that crystal, that you can either place, or that crystal has embodied from Gaia, from Earth, from where it's been bathed in for thousands of years. So yes, totally get that. And actually in one of my meditations, I often imagine myself in a huge crystal obelisk to embody that wisdom, and also for clearing and for nourishment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love that. So I think that, so in my understanding of this, how we help and how we are helped in the transition of someone's life, I think it's fun to jump over to Australia. So this is a little island off the south coast of Victoria. So in Gundit Mara language, it's called Dean Mar, but in colonial terms, it's called the Lady Julia Percy Island. Oh well. So as we drove on the highway, I was just drawn to this. Like, what is that? What is that? What is? You could see it. It's completely flat. So you look out at the sea and you see this flat bar. I'm like, what is that? What is that? So my dear friend and I pulled over at one of the times we went past it and said, all right, let's tune in and see what's going on here. So it was this incredible spirit joined me to explain how this community helped the spirit to let go. So the way that they explain it is that the first year, when they bury the body in the earth and the body decomposes, or sometimes depending on the wetness of the ground, they would leave it out and all the animals and birds and things would clean it up. But that the spirit was allowed to be a spirit in the community for a year. And you could talk to the spirit and it could join in things, but it had 1 year. While the body was decomposing, it had that year to play around and be part of the community. And then they would take the bones and they would canoe them out to this island. And they would leave them on this island. And that was for another year, so that you could learn to separate yourself from your past life, from everything that you knew about the earth and everything that you knew about life on this barren island. So you had no community, you had no village. It was just you to make your peace back with the elements, because that's all you have on the island is earth, air, fire, and water. So you spend the time there, and then at some point, as the constellations move over the top of you, you will get a call from your star group to come back. And once your star group goes over and you get that call, then you just leap back to your star journey. And that's how they understood helping you make the transition,
Isn't that nice? Rather than, now you're here, now you're not, that you have a transition period, which is, if you think about the period of mourning that many cultures have here, that there's so many months or so many years to mourn that person, and then you come out of mourning, and that it
Yeah.
works the other way round as well, that the person isn't just like, bye, I'm gone. It's like a lovely little transition, which I would imagine helps both sides, the person who's transitioned, and for people to know that they're closer and nearer. That's
Yeah.
a very nice philosophy.
No, I love that practice. I think that's such a beautiful practice of, yeah, as you say, working for both of us. So then let's go over to Germany. So this is a place called Bulsenbett, and this part of Germany that I went to has hundreds of these.
So it looks
So,
similar to the one we started with in Ireland,
except way bigger.
way bigger. Oh, yes,
Yeah.
way bigger. And I think it's great that you've put a person in there so we can see the actual size,
Yeah.
and huge rocks, huge.
Massive, massive, massive. And there's hundreds of these, absolutely hundreds of them. So for a sparse population during the Neolithic period, to think that, you would need hundreds of these, really, just to put dead bodies in? I don't think so. So what's going on here? So I crawl in and I,
You're a good
go in.
crawler, aren't you?
Yeah. Yes. How long will the knees survive for this behavior?
Or do you pack
So
knee pads as a sort of prerequisite of any trip?
I don't remember the knee pads, and the worst is I don't remember to take the anti-inflammatory before I go. Anyway, never mind. Blah blah blah. So I crawl in there. I do my, my little ceremony, and I crawl in, and there's a young man, and there's a beautiful sort of blanket uh, on the ground, and the bones of his grandfather are all laid out beautifully on this blanket with flowers and things, and he's sitting with the bones. So he sees me and uh, asks if I'm related. Am I a friend of his father's? And I said, no, no, I'm visiting. So you have to go through the whole, where are you from and why are you here and that sort of stuff. And so then I asked him what he's doing, and he said, well, this is our ritual. So the family, when they bring the bones of the grandfather here and they put them out, the whole nuclear family's there, or whoever is important is there. Then everyone has their private time with granddad. And your job is to go in and tell granddad all of the things you remember about him, the good and the bad. So it's your impression of granddad, both good and bad, and you must do both good and bad. And then you leave him with, love and respect, and you crawl out, and the next family member goes in. And then the dolmen is sealed up. So these would have been completely sealed back in the day. They're exposed now, but they would have been sealed up. So it's sealed up, and an offering is put in front of the door, and then granddad gets to spend the next year contemplating all the things that he was told and reevaluating his life.
So instead of, you know, you transition, off you go, it's a time to reflect on, how did I contribute in my life? Where did I fall short? What a lovely way to kind of ensure that your life has more meaning, and that it really is a playground, a learning center that you can grow and evolve, rather than, oh, I'll just take the karma to the next one. But it's almost like recapitulation that, you know,
Yes.
uh, the Mexican shamans talk about, where, every person, every experience, there's, they've taken your energy, you've taken their energy, and, rather than have that at the end of the life, do it within your lifetime, so you clear
Yeah.
the energy, so you're fully embodied, not drained of energy. So I love this, that it's hearing, what's great about you, and here's what you could have done differently to be even
Yeah.
better.
And I think it's very different for that ancient culture to have that experience with the bones. In their belief system, granddad is listening. So you get a bit of closure and a bit of healing. So whatever trauma there was that was inflicted because of the relationship with granddad, you can leave that.
And of course, so many people have regrets when somebody makes their transition. Oh, I wish I'd told them this. Oh, I wish I'd said that. Or I wish I'd done, you have regrets. And so this is a way to express all those things so that there's completion on both sides.
Yeah. Isn't that gorgeous?
It really is. Again, I love these conversations because they open us up to a new way about thinking about transitions and that completion, rather than
Yeah.
leaving many people traumatized or in therapy.
Yeah, exactly. So this is my favorite story. Ready? This
Oh,
is by
yes.
far the favorite. So this is Portugal, and the site is Anta da Tapado.
Okay, and
Anta
don't
da
those
Tapado.
stones look very similar to what you'd see in Stonehenge?
Hmm. So it's pretty much your standard dolmen style thing. So so this story starts with there's a couple of these very large. So this is the second largest dolmen in all of Europe. It's massive. So those stones are about 4 meters tall. So quite quite an impressive thing. So I go and there's a there's a passageway that's now fallen in and buried. But I'm looking down the passageway and you can see a bit of light at the end of it. And you can see from the bottom of the hill through this tunnel into the dolmen. And I hear music. So I can hear laughter and then I can hear kind of singing, but it's unison singing. Can't quite make it out. And a drum. I'm like, okay, something's happening here. So I make it up around the top because I can't get through this collapsed tunnel. And I look down, and from the where you're standing on the hill there, you look down, and it's about a meter and a half drop into the dolmen. So I'm trying to think, well, hmm, can I? Yeah, I'm sure I can jump down there. So then before I jump, I look across to say, can I get out? So is there a way out? So I look across, and yes, there's a kind of a little V between some stones, and I think I can get out. So I'm inside.
Wow.
So I'm in, and as happens with me, the time shifts and there's a ceremony going on. So I peel against the stones because I don't want to intrude. I don't want to, pull focus. So I try to just stick up against the stones. So there's a shaman sitting, uh, in the middle is another sort of blanket or something, more like a mat that has bones on it. And again, crystals and flowers. Then behind that is a fire. And then behind that is this shaman with a drum. And so I can't quite make out what they're singing, but it's something like um, finishes a verse and then he starts what I think is like the chorus, and it's something like, "This is the guy who did the thing who had the something," and everyone joins in. And then he asks, stops, and everyone has a bit of chitter chatter. And then somebody steps forward and they tell a story about the guy. And this person that stepped forward told a story about him, this guy. There was a flood. Next to where this dolmen is a river. And the river flooded. It was quite a big flood. And this guy swam across the river to save a child, a little girl. And he saved the girl, put her on his shoulders, and carried her back across the river. So this woman told the story. So then the shaman starts drumming and he sings that story as the verse. And then everyone joins the chorus. This is the guy who did the thing, who swam the river and saved the child. So every time a story gets told, a little part gets added to the chorus. So I'm like, oh, that's sweet. So I am looking around, and a young man standing across the dolmen sees me. And so he looks at me, and I'm thinking, oh, well, it's happened now.
Been
So
seen.
I quietly scoot around and I said, what's happening? And he says, oh, we're singing the life of my grandfather. I said, okay. And he said, yeah, he said, it's a ceremony we do. It could take all day. It could take several days. It, it goes as long as it goes. And this is a shaman who travels from village to village doing this. That's his specialty, is he does this singing the life ceremony. So they add these verses, and yes, that's exactly what's happening. So I said, well, why do you do this? And he said, well, when we come into this life, we come in with amnesia. We don't know who we are when we arrive. We don't know who we've been. So we don't want that to happen to anybody else. So we're teaching my grandfather his song so that when he goes where he's going, he's going to know his song. And his song will carry him back into this life, but he'll know who he is and who he was because he has his song. We're teaching my grandfather his song.
Oh my goodness. So it's the song of your life. And again, not just for the grandfather, but again for people left behind, they to sing that song to bring the memories, the spirit, the energy of the grandfather to always be with them. And to have your unique song. These are just so beautiful, so beautiful as ideas to embody with, ceremonies now, really. Can you imagine doing a ceremony that, you know, celebrates your life, but from the perspective of other people and the things that you've done? And
Yeah.
wouldn't that be also a nice thing to start creating here and now, before you make your transition? What would be the song of your life? What are the pivotal times, and what would be the melody? What would be the tune that you can? And that's triggered a memory for me, John
Mhm.
Paul. When I was a child, myself and my best friend, we used to put on shows for our parents who very patiently listened to them. And literally, we just used to stand on top of this table and make up songs and dances and things like that. And do you know that all these years later, I can still sing one of those songs? I still remember the
Brilliant.
melody. I still remember it. Yeah, it became a staple. I didn't write anything down. There was never anything written. There were never any lyrics or anything. We literally, dressed up, and when we couldn't think of anything more, we'd get off the table and say, "Your turn." It was
Yeah.
very, spontaneous.
Yeah.
Yet I remember one of the songs that I sang. And wouldn't it be lovely to be spontaneous and create a song out of a particular memory? And we lose that ability we lose our creativity. Um, I just love these, from whether it's Australia, where you spend a year in touch with Nate or with the community, then you go to an island, your bones and start making that separation. And then this one where it's the song, and then the one in Germany where everybody goes in and says, hey, this is what we loved about you, and this is what we found a little challenging about you, so that you
Yeah.
learn. All of these, though, the theme is that, it makes your life, and for those here living, much more meaningful, much
Yeah.
more meaningful.
Well, and I think there's serious, significant energy, power, whatever you want to say, about creating a song. So we're blessed in that the history of the Waitaha people, which are the settlers of New Zealand before the Maori, we're privileged that we have their story because it was in song. And the elders tell you that it's never been corrupted because it's in song.
And
If it was
there,
just a
that's where
story, it could be
sound doesn't lie. Light can be deceptive. And we are, of course, we come from the sound and light fields, but light can be deceptive, reflective. but sound never lies. So if you want to discern whether somebody's saying a truth or not, listen to the sound of their voice, listen to the song.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, so it's been an extraordinary experience to go to these places that are just written off as tombs and going, well, okay, so death rites did happen here, but what else happened here? And that's a whole nother adventure. But I've just been so privileged to be able to witness these death rites and the preparation of things.
How do you think, John Paul, that we can start to embody some of this into our everyday life, or when somebody makes a transition? Do you feel that you're gifted to come across these, what would be called tombs, so that you can share them, that it'll ignite something in people, that instead of just creating a sort of funeral
Yep.
in the old way, that maybe they'll start thinking of that transition time in a different way?
Yep. I think one of the things that I love about the work as a shaman is occasionally I am a death midwife or a death doula, and that's
Yes.
a job. You take that on. But I think the beautiful thing is because of these experiences, I can make some changes. So I can say when the person passes, whoever's around, I can say, look, everybody's going to give you a half an hour with them and tell them, have the conversation with them. Their spirit, their consciousness isn't completely obliterated. So good and the bad, please take a half hour and have personal closure or sharing. I think that's really good. And then I would love if we would revisit the way we do funerals, and they are celebrations of life. It should
Totally.
always be the celebration of life, but how do you record that life? What's the recording of the life? Are you going to make a movie? Are you going to make a mosaic? Are you going to hire an improv theater company to act out the life and feed them stories? There are all kinds of creative things that we can do about how do we celebrate that life.
And I think that's really being what I call a way shower, and helping the spirit transition, but also a way shower to help people handle and deal with that transition in a way that gives completion, closure, celebration, and joy to both parties, rather than being so many people end up traumatized
Yep.
by this experience. So yeah, the death doula or way shower path
Yeah.
is really such a beautiful experience, as opposed to the fear that is generated in so many people around
Yep.
this.
So the very last thing is another version of this. So we're going to jump back to Germany.
Yeah.
So that's a place at a very bizarre place in Germany called Externstein. So at Externstein, it's been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The Christians had it and created this out of this rock. So they dug in this tomb-like coffin. And the spirits that showed up to explain to me what that was were these monks. And they said this was the place of their resurrection ritual. So every monk at a certain level would crawl in there and lay in that. You can see where the head is and the shoulders, and it's designed to hold a body. And you would crawl in there for 3 days and 3 nights to replicate Jesus's time in the tomb. Fair enough. But that was your resurrection experience. And there's a lot of interesting knowledge that's coming through now about how dolmens were used as resurrection places to go through an experience of transitioning out of this reality. So that death wasn't your only time that you were experienced with this idea of dying to this reality, transitioning somewhere else and coming back. So, they're saying that that's what they think was happening in the Great Pyramid, was that was a place for this resurrection experience to happen. That this was a part of your training, was to go through this death experience.
And again, how wonderful that it's a part of life, and not something that we have in society today, where it's just you don't speak about it. And I remember one of my interests years before my mother transitioned was because when she'd say anything about her passing, my brother and I would basically dismiss her and say, "Oh, don't be silly, mum." And we never
Oh.
allowed her to speak about it and what she really wanted.
Oh.
And what she wanted with, who, we knew she didn't have a will, but I actually remember a few months before she passed, and I had no idea that she would be passing. She did, though. That
Oh.
I'd sat with my brother and my mother and said, so, if we have a will, if we don't have a will, what is it that you really want?
Mm.
And right down to, I knew exactly what music my mother wanted. I knew what she wanted. Um, and again, I put myself through some death doula training with a beautiful woman. And it really helped me help and support my mother and my brother. Like when my mother did make her transition, I'd literally left the house 10 minutes before. And as you know, the spirit often waits till nobody's there. And when I got back, my brother was in the room on the phone and everything. And I said, stop, go and get yourself a cup of coffee. I'll make a cup of tea. Let's sit here
Mm.
with
Yeah.
because her spirit is still here. You
Yeah.
kind of almost go into kind of like, oh, need to call, need to do this, rather than just, it's about sitting and having some space. And I think I stayed there for about 2 hours in that room. And it was a
Beautiful.
beautiful experience. There was nothing creepy or untoward. It was a beautiful experience. And I'm really grateful also that I was able to be with my mother. And were there things that I would do differently? Yes. And I know that understanding and going through some support with death doulas was very, very powerful and very important for me. And
Yep.
I feel it's a gift that we should all look into, because sooner or later, a friend, a loved one, a relative, and making that transition a beautiful experience, both for them, or more beautiful for them and for you and for other people.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Yes. Let's change the way we do this. It's part of a cycle. It's not a linear thing that is over and we have to clean up. Yeah.
Yeah, so this has been an incredible and really powerful conversation, very rich. We've been in Ireland, Australia, Germany, Portugal, and then back to Germany with this, resurrection. Um,
Yep.
wow, that must have been a powerful experience.
Yep. Yep.
So, once again, I thank you for an incredibly insightful conversation. Is there any thought you'd like to leave us all with?
No, I think it's just the joy of being able to share this, that we don't look at this. This is something we don't look at. And if all of these sites are just written off as a tomb and we can dispense with them, that's a shame. What did they do here? What happened here is the important thing. And that's what we need to take into our lives.
And now we know there's some rich, rich celebrations and ceremonies and songs that we can remember and start to sing, and maybe discover the song that was sung by our ancestors for us,
Wouldn't that be beautiful?
so that we can ignite or reignite our memories of who we truly are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John Paul. Thank you.
My pleasure.